Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just want to say this is my first time here in Charleston, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I arrived yesterday afternoon, so got to see some sessions here and some of the city. I'm also absolutely chilled to be here. It's freezing. Like, what's going on with that? I'm not prepared. But thank you so much for coming. I want to thank the festival organizers for having me, and also the sponsor for this talk for sponsoring the talk. I'm just going to be upfront with you. I love aphorisms. I love aphorisms because of Jean Cocteau, the surrealist French painter, playwright, poet, and boxing promoter. He wrote, "Mirrors would do well to reflect a little longer before sending back images." I love aphorisms because of a contemporary Polish aphorist, Ursula Zabora, who wrote, "If the future knew what lay ahead, it would never have arrived." I love aphorisms because of Russian actress from the 1930s and 40s, Faina Ranovskaya, who wrote, "Baldness is the gradual transformation of the head into an ass." First in shape, then in content. And I love aphorisms because of Eric Jaroninsky. He's in the 2010s, when Twitter was at its height of fame, he was the internet's most famous aphorist. He tweeted under the handle The Nine Quarterly. And he wrote, "Ideology, the mistaken belief that your beliefs are neither beliefs nor mistaken." So, aphorisms, what are they? They're just basically short, witty, philosophical sayings. But aphorisms are also the oldest written art form on the planet. The oldest pieces of literature, written literature that we have, come from ancient Egypt and China, and they are aphorisms. So that is 5,000 years ago. So the I Ching, for example, the Chinese Book of Changes, is a collection of aphorisms, and it was compiled in 3000 BCE. Greek philosophers, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, they were all aphorists. And in some ways, this most ancient form of writing is perfectly suited to our short form modes of communication today. Twitter, after all, has the word wit in it. And in fact, that's why I wanted to bring out a new edition of this book, to take into account how the aphorism has evolved in the context of social media, where images and text can be shared in an aphoristic way. So the book, The World in a Phrase, is a chronological history of the aphorism, starting with the I Ching up to the present day. Meme makers, visual artists, street artists, poets who are taking the aphorism into the future. Twitter also, of course, has the word twit in it. And so much of the online discourse today is trash talk and rage posts and hot takes. That's totally the opposite of aphorisms. The platitudes and propaganda of politicians, sound bites of self-help gurus, and the hot takes of social media influencers, those are anti-aphorisms. Aphorisms make you think. They don't promote dogma, they provoke debate. Aphorisms are for thinking through, not shouting down. And also at a time when polarization, not just here in this country, but around the world, is so amped up, aphorisms can serve as psychological circuit breakers to interrupt our assumptions and encourage us to apply some critical thinking to our own opinions. So, here are a few examples. Some of you may have important life decisions coming up. You might want to take some advice from Jenny Holzer, contemporary aphorist. Playing it safe can cause a lot of damage in the long run. Do you want to cut through the partisan crap? Listen to Stanislav Lec, Polish aphorist who wrote during the Soviet regime. His definition of politics: a Trojan horse race. We can laugh, but do you need some motivation for a difficult task? Josh Billings, a contemporary of Mark Twain. Be like a postage stamp. Stick to one thing until you get there. Or how about some encouragement, some affirmation during dark times? G.K. Chesterton has you covered. In the struggle for existence, it is only on those who hang on for 10 minutes after all is hopeless that hope begins to dawn. So, I want to hasten to add, you do not have to agree with aphorisms. In fact, the whole point of aphorism is to make you consider them, to make you mull them over in your mind. And for every topic about which an aphorism has been written, there is an aphorism that says the exact opposite about that same topic. For example, Samuel Johnson, the great English lexicographer, he said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel." Ambrose Bierce, 100 years later, a great American lexicographer, begged to differ with Dr. Johnson. He said, "Patriotism is the first refuge of a scoundrel." Both, sadly for us, are true. And aphorisms, I think many people have this idea of aphorisms as a kind of esoteric, elite art form, only practiced by 17th century French nobility. And while some of the greatest aphorists are 17th century French nobility, the aphorism is the most democratic, with a small d, literary art form that we have. Everybody, and including everyone in this room, hears and shares aphorisms probably on a daily basis. I'm sure you all can think back to your growing up and something a relative always used to say, advice your mother gave you, or a kind of expression among your friend group that served a kind of as a refrain, an aphoristic refrain in your life. And one of the great pleasures of my obsession with aphorisms is people feel compelled to share their aphorisms with me. So don't be shy later on. I want to hear your aphorisms. So this one was shared with me a while ago, and I love it, and it's stuck with me ever since. This was a woman this phrase was like a catchphrase in her family, and she was desperate to know if it's an aphorism. If you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. I saw a young teenager, highly pierced young teenager, swaying down the corridor of a train one morning with a t-shirt, "A weekend wasted is not a wasted weekend." Now that is a philosophy of life I can get behind. So you see aphorisms everywhere. You see them on billboards, and the best advertisements are also aphorisms. So one of my favorite aphorisms is actually an advertisement for yogurt. And it goes like this: "Lick the lid of life." And that's like carpe diem, seize the day, lick the lid of life. What a wonderful expression. So just like a catchy tune becomes an earworm, an aphorism is a mind worm. They help us think through personal challenges, political challenges, social challenges. They help express our personal philosophy, advocate for something, campaign for something. They provide psychological insight, philosophical insight. And though they are short, they spur long-term thinking. And this is another difference between aphorisms and a lot of discourse on social media. So the first aphorism I ever remember reading, I was 8 years old, and I discovered it in the pages of Reader's Digest. And in Reader's Digest, those of you who are mature enough to know what Reader's Digest is, there's a page of quotable quotes in every issue. And in every issue, there's just like a collection of a dozen or 20 quotes from people like Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Phil, when Dr. Phil was a thing, with sayings like, if you marry for money, you'll earn every penny. But I read, when I was 8 years old, the following aphorism by Gerald Burrell, who was the Archbishop at the time in Chicago. The difference between a rut and a grave is the depth. That was exactly, I heard someone say, oh wow. That was exactly my reaction when I was 8 years old. I had no idea what that sentence meant. I was only 8. I had never heard the word aphorism in my entire life, but I knew there was something special about that sentence. There was something about the wordplay and the kind of intricacy of the expression, and it got me thinking, even though I didn't know what it was getting me to think about. And this is the great virtue of aphorisms. So I read that aphorism several decades ago, minimum several decades ago, but I think about it every day. And at one point in my life, when I was in a particularly dissatisfied state with my job, I would think about it every morning as I woke up and walked to the subway. Am I just walking to work, or am I digging my own grave? And I think this is the function of aphorisms. Aphorisms are like a psychoactive substance. Once they get in your mind, they stay there, and they start striking sparks. And they make you think of things differently, and when you start thinking of things differently, you start seeing things differently. Another great thing about aphorisms is they don't offer you any solutions. They don't solve any of your problems. And usually they don't even make you feel that good about yourself. But what they do is they confront you with the essentials. They make you actually confront the question of whether you're just in a rut or you're digging your own grave. This is why I love AI. AI helps us solve problems. AI is an aid to introspection. AI helps us re-examine our assumptions, interrogate our biases, and to think twice. And of course, I am talking about aphoristic intelligence. Okay, so we are going to explore aphoristic intelligence with the help of my trusty little globe. So, in this globe are little slips of paper, and on each slip of paper is an aphorism. One of the ushers will soon appear at the front of the stage, and that person will go out amongst you and will pick a random person, several random persons, and ask you to pick an aphorism from the globe. Then I would ask you to read the aphorism aloud, or you will be helpfully provided with a microphone, and then I will talk about that aphorism and the aphorist who wrote it. I should also point out that there is a blank piece of paper in the globe. Should you pick the blank piece of paper, you have a choice. You can either throw it away and pick another one with an aphorism written on it, or you can name any subject, and I will have to come up with an aphorism on that subject. Now, the ground rules, you have to give me a chance here. Like, it has to be broad enough that I have a fighting chance. So, 14th century Chinese landscape painting, please don't choose that as a subject. I do not have any aphorisms on that subject. But painting would be fine. And I would encourage you to use painting because I've already got an aphorism in mind for that one. So, if you pick the blank sheet of paper and I can't come up with an aphorism, you get a free copy of my book. Prizes to be won. However, if I am able to come up with an aphorism, then you owe me $22.50. So, William Blake, a great poet and a great aphorist, he found the world in a grain of sand, but I find the world in a phrase, and those phrases are aphorisms. So I invite you to pick a aphorism from the globe and we'll get started. And you can just choose a random person.
Hold on.
It's got writing on it.
Okay, are you ready?
We'll soon find out.
I'm just to read this, what it says.
That's the plan.
Better be struck rather than stroked by the hand we'd just as soon not shake.
So
Marie von Ebner Aschenbach.
Yes. So could you read it one more time?
Better be struck than stroked by the hand we'd just as soon not shake.
So this is Marie von Ebner Eschenbach, and she was 19th, 20th century Austrian countess. But from the time that she was a little girl, 8 years old, she wanted to be a playwright. And her father took her to see Shakespeare's plays. And she describes vividly how she was thrilled by Shakespeare's plays, and she just wanted to be a playwright, just like Shakespeare, the Austrian Shakespeare. So as a young woman, I guess it would have been 19th century Austria at that time. I don't even think it was called Austria at that time. She had several plays published, and they were viciously criticized and basically panned by the Vienna theater critics. And I am familiar with getting bad reviews, not very familiar, but it happens, and it's a painful experience. And so Marie von Ebner Eschenbach, all she wanted to do was be a playwright, so for her it was devastating. So her husband one day went to her and said, you know, Marie, I think you should give up this writing business because the negative reviews are really reflecting bad on me. So Marie von Ebner Eschenbach dealt with the discrimination, gender discrimination, sex discrimination, because it was not okay for women to want to be writers. And if they were writers, it was not okay for them to get bad reviews because they reflected poorly on your husband. So many of Marie von Ebner Eschenbach's aphorisms have to do with relations between the genders and also being determined and being resilient as an individual. Here's one. An intelligent woman has millions of born enemies, all the stupid men. Nothing alienates two people who have nothing in common more than living together. So Marie was a very, as a child, very devout, and the local pastor informed her as a young girl that, you know, she would go to hell if she sinned. And she took that very seriously, and she reasoned that it would be better for her to perish than to live into adulthood and risk sinning and going to hell. So she tried to jump out the window as a girl, but she hit her head on the lintel and fell back into the bedroom. But I think that became like a formative experience for her, particularly for this aphorism, which again, I think speaks to all of us who maybe really want to achieve something and we meet some resistance or some disappointments or some failures along the way. Just rise up again from every fall from a great height. Either you'll fall to your death or you'll grow wings. A defeat born with pride is also a victory. Next aphorism, please.
No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. Stanislaw Jerzy Lech.
You read that so well. That is Stanislav Jerzy-Letz, the same person who wrote the aphorism Politics, a Trojan Horse Race. He, and of course, when I need to find him, there he is. He lived in Poland during the Soviet Union time, and he was a dissident. So he was also, he was a Polish Jew, and during World War II, he was imprisoned in a concentration camp. And he escaped from the concentration camp by stealing a German soldier's uniform, putting it on, and walking right out the front gate. And he went on to become a partisan in the resistance, and then during the Soviet regime, he was, and still is today in Poland, one of the most revered writers and dissidents. And unlike many of his colleagues, Letz was never censored. And I think he was never censored because the censors had no idea what the hell he was talking about. Because a sentence like, "No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible," if you think about it literally, it's kind of a non sequitur. It doesn't mean anything. It's absurd. But what's also interesting about that sentence, it's 100% metaphor. There's not a single word that is meant to be taken literally in that whole sentence. But when the sentence was read, you all laughed. Because the metaphor immediately triggered in your brain this storytelling mechanism that we have. And the metaphor, you immediately matched that metaphor to your own either personal experience. It's about groupthink. It's about the disasters that happen when everybody in a group thinks the same way, and no one in that group has the courage or feels safe enough to say, "I think that might not be a good idea." That way, disaster lies. You can think of so many examples in a totally nonpartisan way of political decisions that were made as a result of groupthink and led to disaster. Not just in politics, but in the workplace, businesses, and also in other groups, friend groups, families. And that is the power of metaphor, in just metaphor in generally, but metaphor in aphorisms. One of the reasons that an aphorism can be so short is because of the metaphor. The metaphor gets inside your brain, and you start filling out the rest of the story that's only implied by the metaphor. And this is one of the most beautiful things about aphorisms. They make you, the reader, a collaborator, an accomplice in the creation of the meaning of the aphorism. So you get it's like a joke. Aphorisms in many ways are like jokes, shorn of everything except the punchline. And just like if you have to explain a joke, you know that something is wrong. If you have to explain an aphorism, it's not a good aphorism. So the aphorist in writing the aphorism is being very creative, but you, in interpreting the aphorism, are being equally creative. The aphorist makes that journey to this idea about groupthink in this direction, and you, the reader, take the same journey and you reproduce the same thinking as the writer, you just do it in a different direction. So when you reading and writing an aphorism are almost the same action. There's a French aphorist, Joseph Joubert, he's one of those French nobility I was talking about. He said to produce a thought and understand a thought are almost the same act. To compose an aphorism and to comprehend an aphorism are also almost the same act. And what I'm about to say now might be controversial, but aphorisms are also the highest form of writing because, yes, we have one dissenter in the back, excellent. Because not only is "No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible," it's a great aphorism, but it's also a novella. It's got all the complexity that you would expect from a long-form narrative. It's got characters. It's got plot. It's got a setting. It's got a narrative arc. So another way to think about aphorisms are one-sentence novellas. Here are some more of Stanislav Letz's aphorisms. Optimists and pessimists differ only on the date of the end of the world. In the beginning was the Word. At the end, just the cliche. So, a lot of Letz's aphorisms have to do with the politics of his time, but I think they're super, super relevant today as well. The window on the world can be covered by a newspaper. The mob shouts with one big mouth and eats with 1,000 little ones. Oh, any questions? I forgot to say, I should have said in the introduction, there will be 0 time at the end of this talk for questions. I should have mentioned that earlier. If you have questions, just ask. Raise your hand and someone with a microphone will come by.
No, stand.
So we'll do this aphorism and then there's a question down here. Or is this a question?
No, it's an aphorism.
Okay, I like aphorisms, let's go.
I got a blank piece of paper.
Oh.
Is there...
I'm sorry, that's all we have time for, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me. What would you like an aphorism about?
I'd like an aphorism about soccer.
Yes! Thank you so much. So, Johan Cruijff, famous Dutch soccer player. Have you ever heard of Johan Cruijff?
No, sir.
Yes, sir, or no?
No, sir.
No, sir. So he was a famous Dutch soccer player and coach, and in the 1970s and 80s, and he came up with this idea of total football, which the Dutch team specialized in. And he was a great aphorist. And he's a soccer player. One of his aphorisms was, "You can't win without the ball." Thank you. No, you only get one shot, sorry. Do you have a question?
It's like a statement.
Yeah, so an aphorism is like a statement.
His name is actually Cruyff.
His name is actually Cruijff. That's how it's pronounced in Dutch. So, here's another one I love by him. Before I make a mistake, I do not make that mistake. So, Johan Cruijff was like the Yogi Berra of the Netherlands. And Yogi Berra, what time is it? You mean now? Yogi Berra was also a great inadvertent aphorist. And so it's like deja vu all over again. Those are beautiful sayings. And I also love Yogi Berra. He went into a restaurant and ordered pizza. And the waiter came and served the pizza and was about to cut it. And he said, "Mr. Berra, would you like your pizza cut into 4 or 8 slices?" And Yogi thought a bit and he said, 4, I don't think I could eat 8. So we had a question down here, and for the $22.50 you owe me, young man, I accept cash, personal checks, Venmo. But thank you for choosing soccer.
What are some of the more famous misattributed aphorisms?
Oh, yes. Thank you for bringing up a painful point. So the people like Gandhi, Churchill, any president, I forget who came up with it, but there's a term called Churchillian drift. And it is the phenomenon when someone says something memorable and it inevitably gets attributed to Winston Churchill. So, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. I'm not sure that Gandhi actually said that. And then there's a wonderful aphorism, when you're going through hell, keep going. That is attributed to Churchill, but I don't know that he actually said it. But the thing about Churchillian drift and Churchill himself, Churchill was actually a great aphorist. And there are many aphorisms that are correctly attributed to him. This is another book about aphorisms I wrote. It's an anthology. It's called Geary's Guide to the World's Great Aphorist. And there's 350 aphorists in here, and there's 64 in here. But Churchill is in here with some of his original aphorisms. So, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, these sayings kind of spring up and over time get attributed to someone who didn't actually say them. So I can't think of what would be the most misattributed saying, but Winston Churchill is definitely the one who benefits from that trend the most. Any other questions before we do another aphorism? Question over there.
The aphorisms we've talked about have been one sentence, seemingly. Are there examples of multi-sentence aphorisms or much longer aphorisms?
There certainly are. And I will read some. So, the question was, are there forms of longer form aphorisms? So, here there are 5 laws to the aphorism, and any saying needs to obey these 5 laws to be considered an aphorism. And I know these 5 laws are correct because I made them up myself. First of all, it has to be short. And this will come to your question, sir, in a second. Second, it has to be definitive. No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. It's not like sometimes, if the wind is blowing in the right direction, certain snowflakes, it's definitive. An aphorism must have an identifiable author, otherwise it's a proverb. An aphorism must be philosophical. That is to say, not that it's about being and non-being and some abstract idea of philosophy, but about everyday life, the philosophy of everyday life and how to live a good life. And the 5th law of the aphorism is must have a twist. And that twist could be wordplay, like the difference between a rut and a grave, or it could be a kind of psychological insight that gives the listener, the reader, a twist. So as far as what defines short, I think most aphorisms are 1 sentence, some are 2 sentences, but there can be aphorisms that approach the outskirts of the paragraph, but not longer than that. And why? Because in The Cloud of Unknowing, which is a kind of medieval guide for young men who are aspiring to be monks, the author writes, "Short prayer penetrates heaven." And aphorisms, you kind of need them in emergencies, right? When things are going wrong, you need some instant affirmation, encouragement, help. And giving a long-winded speech when your house is burning down doesn't quite work. So aphorisms need to be short so people can process them quickly. But Balthazar Gracian, who was a 17th century Spanish Jesuit priest, he wrote this beautiful book called it's called The Oracle, basically, and it's a collection of aphorisms, most of which are like dense paragraphs. But the funny thing about, and I'll read one, but the funny thing about these, you can actually take out individual sentences from his dense aphoristic paragraphs, and they can also stand alone as individual aphorisms. So I'll just give you a relatively short one. Know how to use evasion. That is how smart people get out of difficulties. They extricate themselves from the most intricate labyrinth by some witty application of a bright remark. They get out of a serious contention by an airing nothing, or by raising a smile. Most of the great leaders are well grounded in this art. When you have to refuse something, often the most courteous way is to just change the subject. And sometimes it proves the highest understanding to act like you do not understand. So that whole paragraph is an aphorism, but that last line, if it was on its own, it's also an aphorism. So I'd say one sentence to a very short paragraph. Other questions? All right. Loving the questions.
An aphorism, if it's written in, say, Russian, what about the translation to English? How do you handle that?
Fortunately, I don't handle that. Other people handle that. But aphorisms can be very hard to translate because you don't have a lot of context to work with. But like the Faina Ranovskaya, the aphorism about baldness, translates easy. But especially if you're using each aphorisms are universal. They exist. They weren't invented in China or Egypt. They occur everywhere. It's just that the first recording of them was in ancient China and Egypt. But every culture, every country has a kind of unique color to their aphorisms. And sometimes they use similar, there's a kind of thread of metaphor that goes through it. And this is even more evident in Proverbs than it is in aphorisms. And actually, like I said, Proverbs are just aphorisms about which we've lost the identity of the author. So Dutch, and that's why I pronounce Johan Cruijff the way I do, because I do actually speak Dutch. And in Dutch, there are lots of proverbs about water. And one of the proverbs about water, which totally puzzled me when I first arrived in the Netherlands, was learning to speak Dutch, was a saying that goes like this: "It doesn't set any sod on the dike." And I was like, what doesn't set any sod on the dike? And why are you putting sod on the dike anyway? But of course, if you translate it literally like that, it doesn't mean anything to an American like me. But if you translated it, that's like carrying coals to Newcastle, then it's like, oh, I get it. You're doing something that's not having the desired effect, or that's kind of superfluous or useless. So, and I know the person after me has just translated the Odyssey, so it would be interesting to hear his take on the difficulties of translation. So sometimes you have to don't go for the literal interpretation, but find an analogy in the target language that corresponds to the meaning, if not the letter, of the aphorism. And there was a question over here too.
I had the same question. Great minds think alike.
Great minds think alike. We have an aphorist in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. Pick a globe. Pick a globe. Pick a saying out of the globe. Oh, there's the volunteer back there.
We'll come back.
After helping a blind man across the road, we remain slightly undecided. Ramon Gomez de la Serna.
After helping a blind man across the road, we always remain slightly undecided. That is Ramon Gomez de la Serna. And he is one of the strangest aphorists. There are a lot of strange characters in aphorisms, and he's one of the strangest. And his aphorisms, he came up with his what he called gregorias, which in Spanish is his word for aphorism. And he had a formula for his aphorisms. It was humor plus metaphor equals gregoria, his word for aphorism. And all of his aphorisms are these strange, scenes from everyday life that he kind of places in this surreal context. And I think his aphorisms are a great example of what I was saying earlier about how aphorisms make you stop and think. Have you ever helped a blind person across the road? I have. And I did exactly what Ramon Gomez de la Serna says. There was a blind person waiting at a streetlight. waiting for it to cross, and I was waiting. I was standing next to him, and it was not one of those street lights that has the sound like it does today to let a blind person know that it's safe to cross. So I said, it's green, we can go. Do you want to just walk with me? And he said, yeah, thanks. And we walked across the street, and he turned left, I turned right, and I started walking, and I stopped, and I turned around. And it's like a little moment of pause, of thought. Is like, oh, is he going to be all right? Or should I walk a little bit further with him, or something like that? And Ramon Gomez de la Serna, he has this like great skill in observing these moments and noticing these moments. And he places them, by taking them out of their context, he makes you think about them. Ants rush about as though the shops were just closing. The giraffe is a horse elongated by curiosity. Tombs should be made with periscopes. When a star falls, there is a run in the night stocking. Isn't that beautiful? I love this one. What most reveals a man's character is the face he makes when his match goes out on him. I think that's another great example of, like, if you want to, there's a great, I think it was Schopenhauer, if you want to know how you really feel about someone, notice your reaction when a letter from them lands on your doorstep. It works for emails as well. That's like one of these little, and that's what I mean by everyday philosophy. Those little moments where your real self comes out, or you may not be actually realizing what your true thoughts are about something. Ramon Gomez de la Serna is great at pinpointing those moments.
Man is a nerve of the cosmos dislocated, trying to quiver in place.
Thank you so much. That is Gene Toomer. Man is a nerve of the cosmos, dislocated, trying to quiver into place. There's another novella, or that might actually be a novel in one line. But Gene Toomer was an American writer, one of the early members of the Harlem Renaissance. And in I think it was 1926, he published a wonderful book, a novel called Cain. And it's alternating between poems and prose. And Gene Toomer was from, I can't remember where he's from, but he's from the North. But that book was based on a visit that he spent a couple months living in the South. And he wrote Cain based on that visit. And it's a beautiful, ravishing, lyrical novel that's very experimental. And Gene Toomer was a mixed race. And at various points in his life, he identified as black and lived in black communities. And at other points in his life, he identified as white and lived in white communities. And he passed equally in both communities. But that aphorism, man is a nerve of the cosmos, dislocated, trying to quiver into place, I think speaks to that search for identity. And while Gene Toomer had a very specific, was coming to that dislocation from a very specific personal experience, racial experience, I think it's true of all of us. In some ways, we're all dislocated. We're trying to quiver into place. Dislocated maybe from our communities, maybe from our families, maybe we think we've chosen the wrong profession and that rut is getting a little too deep. And I think Gene Toomer's aphorisms speak to this kind of effort that we all have to find home, to find where we belong. And Gene Toomer is essentially kind of a mystic. And all of his aphorisms have to do with this kind of spiritual search. Here's some more. Whatever is sacred. Whatever is sacred. We are tired of not being intense. People mistake, this one's a little bit lighter. People mistake their limitations for high standards. That one comes in handy a lot, I can tell you. To understand a new idea, break an old habit. Each of us has in himself a fool who says, I am wise. Question? Or are you just hungry for an aphorism?
Thank you. What is your process for discovering all of these wonderful sayings? How do you research and find these?
Oh, yeah, thank you for that question. So, as I mentioned, I discovered aphorisms when I was 8. And of course, like I said, I didn't know what an aphorism was. But there were only 2 things to read in my house when I was a kid. One was Reader's Digest, and the other was Time magazine. Ironically, I ended up having a lifetime obsession with aphorisms from Reader's Digest, and I worked for Time magazine. Go figure. But I was an eager reader from a very young age, and I just started collecting aphorisms. So as a teenager, I had posters of Pink Floyd and David Bowie and George Harrison on my wall, and I flipped them over so that the picture was facing the wall and the blank part was facing me, and I started writing the aphorisms that I read on it. And I still have those posters, and they're absolutely jam-packed with aphorisms from anything that I was reading at the time. And so every time I read something, if I saw an aphorism, I would write it down. So I became a collector. Like Gary Steingart yesterday collects watches, I collect aphorisms. My habit is much less expensive than his habit is. And so that's how it works. And I had the idea to, this book is actually, this is a new edition of a book that was published a while ago, but when it was first published, it was the second book that I wrote. And the first book was a popular science book, and it came and went, and nobody, apart from me and my mother, even noticed that it had been published. And that's a very depressing experience. And I remember sitting, yes?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. You have a question, but you did interrupt. That's fine, interrupt.
I wonder if you'd say a word about cliche.
Cliche.
Is that an overused aphorism?
I'll come back to that. So just to finish this question, this answer, sitting in my study, completely dejected by the response to, or the non-response to the first book, I looked up and I saw those posters, and I thought, I'm going to write a history of the aphorism, because that's what I really love, and no one, it turns out, had ever done it before. And so then I went systematically, for that book I spent a year in the British Library, reading everything that had the word aphorism in the title. And to the person who asked about translations, for that book and for this book, I commissioned people to translate from languages that I didn't know, which are most languages. But for aphorists who haven't appeared in English, I had them translated. One of the great things about the internet, and one of the great things about events like these, is that people come up to me and tell me, have you heard of so-and-so, or have you heard of so-and-so? And I just follow those links. And I continue to collect aphorisms. And when I'm working on a new edition of that book as well, and it'll have 600 aphorists in it, not 350. So I had a question in the front when I was so rudely interrupted about cliches. So a cliche is a brilliant saying that it has become over time a victim of its own success. So if you think of like an image like they were like 2 peas in a pod, that's such a cliche, we don't even think about it. It has no kind of impact on us anymore. But try and wipe your mind of all familiarity with that phrase and think of it as if you're hearing it for the first time. It's a brilliant image. like two peas in a pod. What a wonderful, beautiful way to describe friendship. But it's a cliche because everybody saw what a beautiful, wonderful way it is to describe friendship, and everybody started using it. So a cliche is just an aphorism or a brilliant insight that's had the kind of novelty worn away by overuse. And many aphorists take cliches and subvert them to create aphorisms. So Mae West, another actress from the 1940s, was a great aphorist. She said, "When women go wrong, men go right after them." So that's a great way, if you want to practice writing aphorisms, a great way is to take a cliche and twist it. Oscar Wilde does this all the time. He's great at it, and that's a way to get a fresh aphorism. We have a question down here, and
comparing the aphorism with lyrics, have you found aphorisms in musical lyrics?
Absolutely. So a lot of the, like Rodgers and Hammerstein and a lot of the greats from the 30s and 40s have very aphoristic. You can take out a couplet from one of the lyrics and it's an aphorism. You don't need a weather vane to know which way the wind blows. Bob Dylan, great aphorist. Contemporary musicians, Elvis Costello is also a great aphorist. He's got, all of his songs have these really catchy twists. She said she worked, this is more like an epigram. She said she worked for the ABC News, and that was as much as the alphabet as she knew how to use. That's Elvis Costello. But there's a whole chapter in here about poetry. So there are contemporary poets, poets throughout history, where the whole poem, like Emily Dickinson, for example, you can just take her poems or her aphorisms written in quatrains. There's a contemporary poet called Kay Ryan, whose poems are very, very short and very Emily Dickinson-like, and you could call it a poem, but you could call it an aphorism. Wallace Stevens wrote aphorisms, and he's got a collection of aphorisms separate from his poetry. Alexander Pope, almost every other couplet is an aphorism in his case. So aphorisms occur everywhere. Some people deliberately write aphorisms, like Stanislav Letz. He wrote aphorisms. That was his thing. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. You can read Walden or you can read Emerson's essays, and it's studded with aphorisms. And then there were people who are just writing poetry or other things, and the aphorisms occur kind of organically in their poetry, in whatever they're writing. So you can be an accidental aphorist, or you can be a deliberate aphorist. So we have just about 5 minutes left, and if there are more questions, I'd love to take questions, or we can do more globe. Oh, there's a question there, and then in the very, very front.
What's the difference between an aphorism and a quote?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, a quote is just something somebody said. So, like a quote would be, a quote doesn't have the kind of philosophical meaning that an aphorism does. So I'm just trying to think of something that would be good as a quote. Can anyone just think of like a quote? My head is so filled with aphorisms, I don't have any room for quotes. To be or not to be. Jeez, that's quite a quote you chose there. To be or not to be. So a quote like, you could be, you're watching the news and someone reports what the president said, or what a congresswoman said, or what the CEO of a company said. Next quarter we're going to improve our profits, or a chicken in every pot. That's just a quote. And the difference between an aphorism and a quote is the quote has that, like an insight or a twist or some kind of information and insight that you can use. And it's very practical. Oh, you have quotes or aphorisms or both?
Perhaps, I'm sorry. Perhaps a good definition of an aphorism is a quotable quote.
A la Reader's Digest. And the man right behind you. And then we have a...
What's the difference between an aphorism and an epigram?
Oh my gosh. We're playing What's the Difference game now. So, you have a question right here, very quickly, because we're running out of time.
Oh, okay. Do you have your very own aphorisms that you've originated?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to answer this question, yeah. So, difference, I can come back to you on the epigram. We're running out of time. But an epigram is just, it can be an aphorism, but it's not always philosophical. So I also do write aphorisms. Thank you so much for asking. I'll give you the $20 afterwards outside. And I'll just do this very quickly because we're running out of time. Never trust an animal, no matter how many legs it has. There is not much room for error in an eggshell. Young people should picnic in active volcanoes. I'm glad you like that one. And there are certain mistakes we enjoy so much that we are always willing to repeat them. Can I ask you for a little help? Can you throw this to me in a nice gentle arc like that when I tell you to? Okay. Go ahead. Okay. No, please save your applause to the end. So, writing is thinking, that's Emerson, but reading is also thinking. And reading aphorisms is some of the most creative thinking that you can do. Like I was saying, aphorisms, you are collaborating with the aphorist to come to the meaning. You're an accomplice in that creative act. And what an aphorism does, or what you do when you're reading an aphorism, is you're juggling all these balls in your head. All the different meanings and the metaphors. And the great virtue of doing this is it makes your mind do... Oh. The point was... What that was meant to illustrate was it makes your mind do the twist. And that's the relationship between metaphor, aphorisms, and juggling. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much, James. What an absolutely unique session. Wait a minute. I was thinking through, can I end this just with aphorisms? But it's a little bit too early in the morning, but all I'll say is, parting is such sweet sorrow. We'll have to let you go now.
That's a quote.
Well, I didn't know if it was the best I could do. But thank you so much, and thanks again to Marion Cater, our sponsor for this session. We've had a very, very entertaining morning. It's woken us all up. Most of you know you exit through the door, through the courtyard, towards the bookshop, into the bookshop, where James will be willing to sign his books.
Absolutely.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much.